On the late evening hour of April 20th, 2011, a 29-year-old teacher from Alabama would be on the phone with his friend. Suddenly, the call was interrupted by someone knocking on the teacher's door. The call suddenly ended, and the 29-year-old teacher would never be seen alive again. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Kevin Thompson. Viewer discretion is advised. On the morning of April 23rd, the body of a young man would be found off U.S. Highway 278. The coroner would later determine that this man felt every kick, every punch, every stab wound that was inflicted upon him, and that this man was tortured. Who was this man, and how did his life end? Kevin Thompson was born on July 10th, 1981, and he lived in Anniston, Alabama. Unfortunately, I can't really find a ton of information on Kevin's backstory and his upbringing, but in 1999, he graduated from Anniston High School. He then went on to attend and eventually graduate from Jacksonville State University. He was also at one point a very talented and well-respected musician, and he did so at Smith Metropolitan AME Zion Church and also at New Hope Baptist Church. But teaching was Kevin's ultimate passion. It was his main goal. He would eventually become a beloved third grade teacher at Walter Wellborn Elementary School. He absolutely loved his job. He loved his students, and he was very popular amongst students and fellow faculty. Because teaching doesn't exactly pay the bills, he had to have a second job as well. So he worked at a Walmart Vision Center in Jacksonville. Kevin wasn't married, he didn't have kids of his own. He had several siblings, but he lived alone in an apartment in Jacksonville, Alabama. On the night of April 20th, 2011, Kevin was just having a very relaxing night in, just wanted to hang out and kick his feet up. He would call a very good friend of his, whose name was Chris Wilkerson, and it was really just to shoot the shit and just talk and have a conversation with his friend. This was sometime around 8, maybe 8:30, when all of a sudden, Chris would later go on to tell police that he could hear someone knocking on Kevin's door, and then as Kevin was on the phone with them, he answered the door, and then Kevin said this: "I didn't know you was bringing all of these people with you." And then the call just dropped. Chris tried calling Kevin back, and Kevin actually answered, and he just very briefly said, "Hey, I'll call you back in a few minutes, okay?" And then he hung up the phone. And then Kevin never called back. A few minutes went by, 30 minutes, 45, an hour, no call. So then around midnight or so, Chris tried calling Kevin back, but Kevin, he never answered the phone. And he called several times, but still nothing. He texted, nothing. The following morning, students were beginning to pile up outside of their third grade classroom. The classroom door was locked and the lights inside were off. And this was the room to Mr. Thompson's class. The kids were still waiting for Mr. Thompson to show up, and faculty and even the kids were like, well, this is kind of weird. Mr. Thompson's always here way before school starts, and he's never late. He's never not shown up for school, and he also didn't call that day. He didn't call anyone to say he wasn't coming in, he was feeling sick, nothing. So one of the school resource officers, his name was Brendan Harris, he would actually go to the address that was on file with Kevin Thompson there at the school. It turns out it actually wasn't Kevin's apartment, it was actually the home of his mother and his sister. So the officer informed them of their concerns that Kevin hadn't shown up, that Kevin wasn't responding to anything. So the two ladies, then they try calling him and they get no response. So what they do is they go over to Kevin's apartment. When they got there, the first thing that his sister, Rena, noticed was that his silver Honda Civic was not in his assigned parking spot, and it wasn't anywhere parked anywhere else near his apartment. And then something else weird and very concerning was the fact that there was a shoe just sort of laying next to where Kevin's parking spot is. And it was confirmed to be one of Kevin's shoes. So Rena and her mom, Frances, they went to his apartment. The door was unlocked, which again was unusual. Kevin wouldn't leave the door unlocked. They went inside and honestly, nothing seemed out of place. Everything looked normal. Nothing, no foul play. Nothing was wrong. But they would still call police, and police would come out, the Jacksonville Police Department. They did a very basic check of the apartment, and they said, all right, yeah, I mean, there's nothing out of the ordinary here. We can't really do anything because we don't see any signs of foul play. We can't go off of just like a shoe in the parking lot. Kevin's mom would describe the police's behavior as very nonchalant, as if they just really couldn't be that concerned about Kevin suddenly disappearing. So Kevin's mom, she started the legwork for the police. See a lot of that in cases I cover. And what she found was when she called Kevin's bank, she found out that several ATM withdrawals were made on the night of April 20th. And also a couple tried the next morning around like midnight or so. Now police get involved. They go to the banks. They are able to get the footage from the ATM machines. They're not usually always the best footage, but it's something. And they pull up the time frames of when the withdrawals were made. The first one was at 10:19 p.m. They see a silver vehicle pull up to the ATM, and they could tell there's at least two people in the car. The driver is wearing a baseball hat, and it looks like there's a letter A on it. And he was very obviously trying to disguise his face. He was putting his arm over his face. But the problem that he didn't realize, is that on his hand was a tattoo. Kevin didn't have any tattoos on his hand. So they knew this driver, the person driving his car, likely his car, wasn't Kevin. They then looked at the passenger, and this was very concerning because the passenger seems to be holding like a rifle, some type of gun, and they were pointing it towards the back seat of the car. Unfortunately, there was no visuals of the back seat. At 10:26 p.m. at another ATM, they observed the exact same scenario. Silver car, man behind the wheel with a ball cap that has an A on it, guy holding what appears to be a gun, pointing it towards the back. Then at 12:13 a.m., now on the morning of April 21st, 2011, they see the silver car, again, pull up to an ATM, but also with them is another car, what looks to be a dark-colored SUV. So police took images of all of the people they could see in the cars, and they would bring them to Kevin's mom and sister. And his sister, Rena, recognized one of the men, and it was the guy in the passenger seat holding the gun. She said it looked very similar to a man that they knew named Tyrone Thompson. Tyrone Thompson has no relation to this Thompson family, but Tyrone and Kevin were friends since childhood. They did lose connection over the course of adult years. And that's mainly because Tyrone was in and out of prison for petty crimes. But after his last prison stint, he got out. Tyrone's mom had asked Kevin if, you could help be some kind of positive influence on Tyrone, something to get him in the right direction. And Kevin said, of course. Police pretty quickly find Tyrone, and they're able to track him down, and he willingly goes in and answers questions. He says that the man they want to talk to is one of his friends named Nicholas Smith, that Nicholas would probably know about the disappearance of Kevin. Around this same time, a woman named Cynthia Worf and her husband would end up calling police because when Cynthia got home early one afternoon, she noticed a silver car, what looked like a Honda Civic, in her garage. A car that she doesn't own, and she didn't recognize it as belonging to anyone else. Sort of surrounding the car, appearing to be working on it, was her daughter, Jessica Foster. And then she also noticed Nicholas Smith, and then an acquaintance of theirs, Whitney Ludlow. There were two other men that Cynthia did not recognize, but later those two men would be identified. And they were Blake Hamilton and Teddy Lee Smith. Apparently, Nicholas had called Whitney around 3 o'clock in the morning on April 21st and asked her, hey, can we store this car at your place while we're finding some place to chop it? When Cynthia's husband makes the call to police and police get to the house, this is when they noticed there were two men in the garage at this point trying to chop this car. And that was Blake and Teddy. Those are the ones who were there. The other three individuals, Jessica, Whitney, and Nicholas, were not in the garage any longer because they had taken off to do something else real quick. The police managed to stop this destruction of the car, and they would apprehend the two men because it would be determined that this was, in fact, the silver Honda Civic of Kevin Thompson. Kevin Thompson was nowhere to be found. When Nicholas, Whitney, and Jessica, they were driving back towards the house, they noticed police activity in the neighborhood. So they're like, oh shit. So they fled. They literally fled out of state. They drove to Georgia, Carrollton, Georgia. When they got to Carrollton, Nicholas told the two girls that, yeah, it was the whole car thing. It was because I may be involved in a murder. That I had help with Tyrone and like another one of our friends, Jovan Dwayne Gaston. Now, Cynthia, back at the house, says, hey, Nicholas left his vehicle, his black SUV, at a parking lot right down the road from our house. You might want to look at it. And then she told them that the three people, including her own daughter, they fled in a GMC Yukon. Through tips and other sources, they were able to track down that Yukon near or at the Atlanta airport in Georgia. And they basically surrounded the car when they found it. And inside was Nicholas, Jessica, and Whitney. And all three of them were arrested. In the Yukon, police would find a camera that was registered to Kevin Thompson. So that was stolen from Kevin's property. They also found a baseball hat with the letter A on it. Remember the ATM footage? The guy was seen wearing a hat with A. Whitney Ludlow would confess to police that she stole a ring that she found in the silver car, and then she pawned it for $200. Police were then able to obtain a warrant to search Whitney's home. In a garbage can outside of her house, they found a treasure trove. They find a pair of men's Nike Air Jordans with bloodstains on them. They find a package of what looks to be, that looks to have held duct tape. And then inside the house, in another trash can, they would find the roll of duct tape that was basically almost used up. They also found a t-shirt, and inside the t-shirt was a knife, and that knife had bloodstains on it. Next, they found a pair of Coogie jeans, and those had blood and mud all over them. And then they found a pair of boxers, and inside those, or on the outside, those boxers had bloodstains. The blood found on the knife, the jeans, the shoes, the boxers, all of that would be a confirmed DNA match to Kevin Thompson. They then swabbed the inside of the boxers and the shoes, and they found traces of like touch DNA. So basically the DNA was transferred by whoever wore them. That DNA would match Nicholas Smith. So they knew that Nicholas Smith was wearing clothing that was then painted with the blood of Kevin Thompson. It was obvious to investigators that Kevin Thompson was dead. That would sadly be confirmed on the morning of April 23rd, 2011. The body of Kevin Thompson was found down an embankment near some rail guards off US Highway 278. This is in Cherokee County in Alabama. His wrists were bound together with duct tape, which would later be forensically matched to the roll of duct tape they found thrown away. Kevin had a cut across his throat. It was deep enough to cut through his windpipe and his left jugular vein. The coroner would determine that this caused blood to fill up in his lungs. He had a total of 4 stab wounds to the left side of his body. All of those stab wounds had punctured his left lung. And then 2 of them were deep enough to actually puncture his heart. He also had massive contusions on the left side of his face, which would come from him being kicked and punched repeatedly. He had minor bruises around the rest of his body as if he had been just like pushed over and kicked and, various places, and maybe he fell down. And then he also had defensive wounds on his hands. The coroner would determine that all of these injuries would not have killed him right away. Kevin didn't die right away, basically. Kevin, he literally suffered and was tortured because it would have taken time, according to the coroner, for all of these injuries to take its toll and finally end his life. The coroner said that Kevin, unfortunately, would have gone through an excruciating amount of unimaginable levels of pain. Police then, they go through Nicholas's SUV, and when they open his SUV, it smells very heavily of like bleach and cleaning supplies. But they do spray it down with luminol, and they find all sorts of separate, blood stains, which they test, and it does match that of Kevin Thompson. So they now have Nicholas linked by his car and by his clothing to the murder of Kevin Thompson. So on April 27th, 2011, after Nicholas was extradited back to Alabama, because remember, he was caught in Georgia. He would talk to police, he would waive his Miranda rights, and he would tell the story. He said around 10 p.m. on that fateful night, he got a phone call from Tyrone. Tyrone told him, "We got to go get some money." Tyrone then came and picked up Nicholas, and then he picked up their other friend, Jovan. They then went to Kevin's place. They knocked on his door, and they basically, essentially forced their way in. And then a few minutes later, Nicholas said that Tyrone grabs Kevin's phone and smashes it to pieces. They then forced Kevin into his own car in the back seat while Nicholas drove it. Jovan had brought along a rifle, and so he used that in the car. They then drove around the town, going to various ATMs to withdraw the maximum amount of money that the ATM would let them withdraw. I don't know the exact amount of money they got. I thought I read somewhere like it was about a couple $100. There's only so much money you can actually withdraw total in a day, so they weren't gonna get much. But after they were done with that, they went back to Kevin's apartment, where they then to pick up one of their other cars, and then they put Kevin inside the trunk of his own car. They then drove to a place where they could pick up Nicholas's SUV. And then they all drove to Cynthia Worf's house, because they had called her around 3 o'clock, or they had called Jessica around 3 o'clock that morning to see if they could drop off the car and store it there. But before they did that, they went to a gas station where they purchased the roll of duct tape. They would bind Kevin up with it, and then they would transfer him to Nicholas's SUV. Then they would drop off the car at the Worf house. They then went to Tyrone's apartment, where they left Kevin in the trunk, and they discussed, how do you want to kill him? How do you want to get rid of him? And eventually they would decide to drive to an isolated portion of Highway 278. They brought him down to a secluded area where they forced him to the ground, and they started to kick him and punch him in the head. And then one of the men took a knife and just cut through Kevin's throat, but that didn't kill him. As a matter of fact, that caused him to scream and cry, and he was screaming out for help. They then kicked him around some more, and then they took turns taking a knife and jabbing it into the left side of his body. They did this slowly, and they said he was alive for all of it until the very last stab. And then probably a few minutes after that, they said, is when he eventually died. So yeah, it's confirmed that he was tortured and he went through absolute fucking hell. And then they just took his body and they just threw it down an embankment. Just threw him away like garbage. Nicholas tried to minimize his involvement by saying that this wasn't his idea. This was all Tyrone's idea. I just sort of went along with the ride and blah, blah, blah. But later on, there would be testimony from several people, including Jessica and Whitney and others, that said that it was actually... So Tyrone all he wanted to do was rob Kevin. That's it. He didn't want to take the car. He just wanted to rob him. Basically force him to give money from his ATMs. And then Nicholas decided he wanted to steal the car. And then stealing the car meant, well, we probably have to kill Kevin at this point. So the other two men were just like, okay, I guess. Like they didn't stop it. They didn't try to stop it. So they were very much just as involved as Nicholas was, but the grand scheme of like murder and all that was really orchestrated by Nicholas. But again, all three men took part in it, so it doesn't really matter. So all three men were arrested and they were charged with capital murder. At their trials, they would have people like Jessica and Cynthia and Whitney, and all of these people would testify against them. And the physical forensic evidence was like astronomically against the defendants. They obviously did it. So all three men would eventually be convicted of capital murder. Nicholas Smith would end up getting sentenced to death. At one point they tried to appeal it and he ended up getting resentenced to death. So he got the death penalty, but he is still awaiting his execution. Jovan Gaston was also sentenced to death, but I think it was in 2018 or so, where the sentence was actually overturned, and so he was then resentenced to life in prison without parole. And then finally, Tyrone Thompson, again convicted, but he was not eligible for the death penalty because he had an IQ that was at 70 or right below 70, so legally they were not allowed to execute him. So he was sentenced to life in prison without parole. So one man sentenced to death, the other two life without parole. I honestly don't know the outcome of like all the other players involved, like Whitney and Jessica. So Whitney didn't know that the items in question were thrown away at her place. Nicholas did that unbeknownst to her. But in terms of like, were they charged with anything in terms of fleeing the police and with a wanted man and all that, I don't know. But all of this for what? A few $100? They got nothing for the car because they got caught. All of them were caught and charged within a week of it happening. So what was it for? The motive obviously was money, but I mean, they would do all of that and just get caught. They tortured that poor man. It's just really sad. But that is it for this case. I hope you found it interesting. If you want to see shorter form cases from me, I have a TikTok page. I have about 2.8 million followers. I don't use it anymore, but it's there with like well over 2,000 videos of many cases. And I also have a bunch of videos here now on YouTube. I post long videos every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, and I post short videos kind of in between. And compilation videos sort of for my TikTok scattered in here a few times a week. If you have any cases you would like me to cover, you can send me an email to mikey@truecrimerer.com. I'm so sorry about the dogs barking in the background. But before you do, please check my case list. My link tree is just below in the description. And on that link tree, you're going to find the crimerer case list. Go there, scroll through the list. You can also search through it. There's like 4,000 plus names, so it's a lot. If you don't see the name, then email me the name, when it happened, where it happened. And then if you do see the name, please don't send me it again because it's already on there. I choose my cases at random, you guys, so I don't like pick cases based on anything other than randomness. Finally, if you would like to support me in any way, we do sell merch. We sell hoodies. It's winter now. Winter is coming. We sell t-shirts. We sell mugs and a wine glass. We sell a Christmas ornament for your Christmas tree. Big sellers last year, so yeah. But yeah, you can do that. It's also linked in the link tree below. But that is it for this video. So until the next case, True Crime Maroonies. I like apples. Do I? Dog agrees. Huh?